Morgan, please call roll.
Yes. Andrea Alstone.
Here.
Mike Kowalski.
Here.
Gwellen Paliaga. Absent. Carice Geronimo is absent. George Williamson.
Here.
Michael Winkler.
Here.
Jim Zolik.
Here.
All right. Well, thank you, those of us joining on this fine July evening. And our first order of business is approval of the minutes. In your packet, we have the regular meeting minutes for May 16th. And all of you were there, so you'll be able to vote. Any corrections or modifications to the minutes? Hearing none. Any public comment on the minutes? Morgan? You're muted.
No hands are being raised.
Okay, then I would entertain a motion for motion approval, please.
I will move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Michael. Remind me, we call roll on these, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Please call roll.
Andrea Alstone.
Aye.
Mike Kowalski.
Yes.
George Williamson.
Yes.
Michael Winkler.
Yes.
Jim Zolik.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This next item is oral communications. This is the opportunity for the public to speak to us about any matter not on the agenda. There's a limitation, but Morgan, do you see any public that would like to comment?
Yes. Chris Richards.
Okay.
Chris Richards.
Please address the committee.
Hello, Chris Richards here. I am a resident business owner and member of Responsible Growth Arcata, a local community group. Just quickly, this is a friendly reminder about committee members' responsibilities with recusals. Committee members with business conflicts of interest and home ownership conflicts should be recusing themselves during applicable agenda item topics. Be assured that this is not a statement for personal attacks, but strictly a business and proper procedural comment. We all want success for the city of Arcata's future and do not want the issue of proper procedural conduct to become a trip hazard or legal issue for the city processes. Thanks for your time. Thanks for letting me talk at the beginning here. And also, thank you so much for all your hard work and commitment. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Any other commenters?
No other hands.
Okay. Good.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask a quick question for Emily. But so, given the last the public comment that we just heard, Emily, is there? And I know for the meeting tonight, George is recusing himself, but is there anything else as committee members that we should be aware of? Just in regard to what was just said. I just want to make sure it's clear to all of us what sort of the guidelines are. Often with the Energy Committee, there's not I don't know. It doesn't seem like we end up with controversial topics. Not that it only applies if it's controversial, but in any event, it hasn't been an issue. I mean, I've been on the committee for 20 years and it's come up very infrequently, but I think it would be good. I just want to be clear in my head as to when I should be aware of a potential conflict of interest that for myself and know to recuse myself. And I think it'd be good for all of us just to be clear on that.
Sure. I can speak briefly on it, and certainly we'd be happy to have Bridget Dory, our city clerk, follow up with some additional guidance if that's helpful for committee members. What I would say is if there is any potential for what could be considered a benefit or a particular personal gain related to an agenda item, then committee members should recuse themselves. So, for example, if a consultant is working on, here's a random example that I'll use. If the county were to select a consultant to do the environmental impact report for the climate action plan, and there was a consultant working on that EIR who sat on the energy committee, they would need to recuse themselves because they have a conflict of interest. Or if there is a committee member that lives within a distance from a particular area that a decision could be made that could affect their property where they could have a material gain, that is another example. I want to say that distance is 500 feet, but I would need to double check to be certain. To my knowledge, there aren't committee members who live or have property within that boundary. But for at least for the Gateway Plan, I know that is an item that's been coming up for question. But I will double check on that. Or if there are committee members who do own property within the Gateway planning area that I'm not aware of, then that is certainly something to be mindful of when going to that agenda item if recusal is needed.
Emily, what is the north boundary of the Gateway project?
Oh gosh, I would need to look up a map, Michael. I'm sorry, I don't have it offhand, and I think that the community development director, actually, I think he's having trouble signing into Zoom, and I'm a little distracted because I see him calling my cell phone as I'm talking here. So why don't we hold for now, and then when we get to that agenda item, we'll have David outline the boundaries of the planning area as well as the parameters around recusing. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
And then I'm going to mute myself and call David and make sure he can get into this meeting. Just one sec.
And Michael, just for your early information, related to your property, the closest boundary, do you know where the Hideaway mini store is west of you?
Where what is?
There's a Hideaway there's a mini storage at fronts on Alliance, just to the west of you. That's the closest, the east edge of that mini storage that fronts on Alliance and goes all the way down to 14th Street.
That is one block east of me.
Okay.
Or west of me.
Yeah, that's the closest Gateway area boundary to your property on K Street. Yeah. Anyway, we'll let David, Loya, we'll let city staff do that, but keep that in mind in terms of distance. Good. Okay. Then,
George, I'm going to hop in real quick. I believe I lowered Chris Richards' hand, so I'm just going to ask him if he wants to speak again because I see a hand up and I thought I lowered it. So we're going to check in with Chris, see if he has one other public comment.
oh, sure.
Chris, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I can easily help clarify this. I've read the Gateway area plan draft numerous times. I know the area real well. My shop is on the north end of the boundary, and Michael, your house is 2 blocks, a block and a half south of me. You're right across from Rich's Auto Body. That boundary is right. The street is right on your address there. So I would say you fall in the same realm as Mayor Stacey Abrams Salazar, and that is the reason she had to recuse herself. So, I'm surprised you don't know where the boundary is because we're discussing the Gateway tonight, and that would be a pretty clear thing for you to know. But yes, you are definitely within 500 feet of the boundary. So I would caution you with this and maybe figure out what your game plan is, because like I said before, not a personal attack. I just want people to all be doing what they're supposed to so we don't trip on this later when we're trying to get it together, when we adopt this. So anyway, thank you for letting me speak again. Anyway, take care.
So I think that what we should do is wait until David is on, and then,
Yep, and I
David
see.
can
Great.
advise me on that.
We're going to get David on here now. Hi, David.
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry, Morgan. Can you promote me to panelist? I have some materials that I'll need to present later, and I can't do that if I'm just
Absolutely.
speaking.
Yep, definitely. Here you go.
Thank you.
We have one more agenda item before we get to Gateway.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Any agenda modifications that this committee would like to make for tonight's? Okay, hearing none, then we're going to move on to new business. And tonight we're electing chair and vice chair. So our practice is to solicit nominations for chair first. So would anybody like to nominate a committee member to serve as chair for this? Now, Emily, we delayed this a little bit. So is this for the calendar year or is it for the fiscal year to start?
Sure. So our municipal code states that committees shall elect a chair and a vice chair every July, or in other words, at the first regular meeting after the start of the fiscal year. Last year, we elected a vice chair, Andrea, in July, and then we continued the election of chair until September for your term as chair. So ideally, we would get back to that July cycle again, but certainly knowing we're missing committee members, the committee could decide to continue it to September again, and then knowing that we'll try to get back to July the following fiscal year. So just lining out the potential options.
Very good. So what's the pleasure of the committee? Do you want to wait for Wellen and Carice in September, or do you want to work ahead with a nomination tonight?
I would rather wait.
I guess I would suggest one thing, George, just to get a sense of for those of us who are engaged in the meeting, as to, because I think one of the issues here is like, who's interested and willing. We can nominate each other, but if the person's not really willing to take on the position, then that's not going to work. And if some of us that are on the meeting tonight aren't on the meeting in September, then we're going to be right back in the same position. So at least if we could kind of get a sense of things, and then I'm happy to wait until September to make a decision, but at least that way we could kind of have a bit of a heads up. And if somebody here is interested and doesn't make the September meeting, they could probably, figure out how to get their nomination in before, it not even being there.
Okay. Yeah, I think. So committee members, Mike, any interest in chair or vice chair?
I don't think I'm interested in serving in either of those roles. But one question I was going to ask anybody on the committee, is anybody interested in being either?
That's a very good question. Now, two people have asked that question, so it makes it even more meaningful. Okay, Andrea, interest in continuing on as vice chair or ascending to chair?
I would be happy to continue on as vice chair.
Okay, good. And Michael?
I would be interested in being in either role.
Okay. And I'm interested in continuing if that's the pleasure of the committee. So,
okay. Good.
Questions? And at the committee's good recommendation, we would like to continue the chair nomination and selection to our September meeting. Emily, do we need motion second to accomplish that?
I believe so. And just for clarification, is the motion to continue both chair and vice chair to the September meeting?
Well, we've got I heard chair, but I'm a big believer in full participation. So let's make it a motion for chair and vice chair nominations and selection in September. Would a committee member please make that motion?
I move that that the committee select chair and vice chair at the next meeting in September.
Very good. Second?
I'd be interested if this is appropriate. I'm not certain if it is, but I'll say it, and then someone can comment on whether it's appropriate or not. And that would be to nominate folks for chair or vice chair going into the next meeting, and that way there's already sort of people nominated. I mean, given that, I mean, it sounds like Michael is interested and Andrea is interested to stay on as vice chair, and George, you're interested. So, I don't know. Again, maybe we just wait. I don't know if that's
Jim, I think I sort of understand what you're saying, and sounds like maybe an appropriate thing to do would be take the summary that you just said, like who's interested in what, and put that in the minutes, and that way it's in there. So we remember what we talked about, and the two committee members who are not here will see that also.
Yep, that's my thought.
Very good. Good problem solving. So we have a motion. We need a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, good. Call roll.
Andrea Alstone,
Yes.
Mike Kowalski,
Yes.
George Williamson,
Yes.
Michael Winkler,
Yes.
Jim Zolik.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think, I like the idea of all committee members weighing in, and Mike, good comment on having the record of this conversation carried forward in the minutes. All right.
Thanks, Mike.
So, old business. We have one old business item. Consider the Gateway Area Plan and provide a recommendation to the council, city council. And I have a conflict of interest due to my firm's role in that particular document. So with that, I am going to leave the meeting. And in terms of, this will be the main item of the discussion. There's just a few things left on. So Morgan or Emily, if you want to text me when those are done, I'm not sure I'll be able to get back on. But anyway, the most important thing is I'm recusing myself from this agenda item, and I am leaving the meeting. So best of luck in your discussion. Thank you.
Great. And Emily, can you text George with the number you have when it's time?
Yep. And George, just to confirm, the number, last two digits are 61. Is that the kind of cell number for you? Okay, perfect. I'll text that number.
Thanks so much. Okay, bye for now.
Bye, George.
Bye, George.
Yeah, David, the next question is whether I have a conflict of interest because of where I live.
Yeah, and again, committee, apologize for not being here on time. I had the wrong time down on my calendar, so I apologize. And so I just wanted to confirm before we get started that my understanding is that at the last meeting, there was a discussion as to Michael running the meeting as chair pro tem, and that motion was actually acted on. Is that correct?
We did not discuss it at the last meeting. That was discussed just this past week.
Yeah, it was done via email.
Yeah, we requested someone to fill that role.
Okay, so just to keep procedure completely above board, we now have a meeting without a chair for all intents and purposes, and so I would offer that either the vice chair could fulfill that role, or if you wish to assign a chair pro tem, you would actually need to have a motion, a second, a vote to appoint that person to serve pro tem.
So it is indeed the case that Michael Winkler needs to recuse himself from the Gateway discussion?
Okay, so that's a good point to take that up first, because I know the discussion was that Michael was going to take on the pro tem chair position.
Yeah, and if it isn't Michael, then it would be Andrea, because she participated in the Zoom and knows our process.
Right. And so in terms of recusals, let me just share my screen here real quick to verify the area. Now these are, there's no, for the purposes of, conflict of interest, it's actually a little bit more complex topic than you would think, and you can't just boil it down to, are you within 500 feet? 500 feet is a threshold, one of the thresholds for a 1099 type conflict, but it's not the only piece of the analysis. And so, Michael, without pointing out your home over Zoom, I think you can see that the boundary of the gateway area is relatively close to where you live. So the first step that I would say, and I'm not able to give you legal advice, you would actually need to contact the FPCC in order to get a formal ruling, or you would need to speak with our city attorney to get some insights into your specific potential conflict. But I can tell you the things that I'm familiar with my years of working with the city, and the kinds of things that you'd have to take into consideration, just so you can be apprised. And there is an exemption for a person's personal property in which they live if there is a potential conflict of interest, and that is the only potential conflict. There are also other ramifications for folks that operate businesses either out of their home or out of a location for which they have some real property interest, whether that's a lease or ownership. And so that's another layer that would need to be considered. And then, ultimately, I think that, the courts deal with, strict conflict of interest, but, in the court of public opinion, if there's a clear potential perception of conflict of interest, then, that's an issue as well. I will also say that all of these categories of potential conflict of interest are lesser for a recommending body. And so, unfortunately, at this time, I'm not going to be able to give you a very clear-cut recommendation for what you personally should do. And I'm, going to have to leave it to you to decide whether or not you feel like you may have a conflict of interest that prohibits you from participating in this discussion. And if that is the case, then it appears to me that we don't have a quorum, and we would have to end the meeting anyway. And so I would suggest that you just move on to your next agenda items. Michael, if you feel that you're potentially conflicted and wish to not participate as a result.
Well, since from just your description that since I have no real property other than my personal home in Arcata, and you have suggested that there's an exemption for a personal home. I do an operated business out of my home, but I have no real property, so I will not recuse myself. And I will ask for a formal ruling, but for now I will not recuse myself.
Okay. So in that case, either the vice chair can run the meeting, or you'd have to go through the steps to appoint a pro tem.
Either way, whatever it is, the pleasure of the committee.
Either one works for me. I mean, I have not actually run a committee meeting yet, but I'm willing to take that on.
I mean, I've run city council meetings many times, so that process is familiar. And a year of it with Zoom.
Well, I don't know how other committee members feel.
Well, it sounds like there was some sort of discussion about this prior to the meeting. Is that correct?
Well, there was, because I was originally not going to be at this meeting, and life and COVID happened in my family, and so I was actually able to attend. And so the committee was preparing as if I was not able to attend the meeting, and that's where Michael stepped up. And then last minute, I was actually able to attend. So.
Oh, got it. So the only reason Michael would have had to been chair pro tem is because the vice chair, you, would not have been here.
That's right.
Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, Andrea, it seems like you would be the appropriate person then to run, in my opinion.
That's fine with me if you're ready to go ahead, Andrea.
I will. And please feel free to correct me if I'm not doing something correctly.
And Andrea, I'm going to kick it off with letting you know that we have 5 public members attending.
Yeah, so just a point for me. Do we take the item and then, staff reports, committee discussion, and then public comment? Is that typically the structure of things?
Usually we'll do a staff report, questions of the staff report, public comment, and then deliberations. So that would be appropriate, I think.
Well, it sounds good. So I guess I'm now officially leading the meeting. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
And
So,
I would like, Andrea, I want to check with you about your preference and maybe the committee. We talked about 2 minutes per public member for comment time. Do you want a total time limit for the entire public comment period, or are you comfortable with just the 2 minutes per person?
I think 2 minutes per person sounds good, just looking at our attendee list. So
Great. Sounds good. I will have the timer when that time comes.
all right, sounds good. So I guess, can we get a staff report?
All right, with all that process taken care of. I do want to start, before I get into the formal staff report, I want to start by, just indicating into the record officially, since, there are, a lot of people paying attention to this issue and are very attuned to the, the various procedures that we're going through. Earlier, when we mentioned that we had a discussion about who would be the chair pro tem, that discussion was limited to an email, a BCC email to individual committee members in order to gauge their interest in running the meeting as necessary. And so I just want to be clear, there were no Brown Act violations. There weren't participants of multiple party conversations that violated the Brown Act in making that discussion. It was just to be sure that we came into this meeting prepared so that the committee and the public are aware of that. Okay, so I have a brief staff report. I've asked Emily Benvey to kick me under the table if we get past 3 minutes, and luckily she's not in the same room, so she won't actually be able to do that. But if you could just indicate to me when I get to 3 minutes, and I'll try and start wrapping it up there. And the reason for that is because I want to make sure that the committee has the majority of the time dedicated in this time frame to be able to talk about the Gateway Area Plan. So my presentation will focus on the purpose, the process and timeline, the materials that you have in your packet, and then ultimately the ask. And so to that end, I'd like to give you a succinct description of those different topic areas. So in terms of the process, the purpose, you can read it in the beginning of the Gateway Area Plan, but just to summarize real succinctly, the Gateway Area Plan is an element of the general plan that's intended to provide high quality, mixed income, mixed use, and mixed ownership neighborhood revitalization. The idea is that we have a streamlined permitting pathway that goes through this process with all the committees, the commissions, the decision makers to begin with, and then we tell the community and the developers what it exactly is that we need as a community to grow and develop into the future. The Gateway is one of several rezones. Some folks have said, why aren't you doing this elsewhere in the city? We are, and these are to meet the long-term housing and economic development needs of the current and future residents. And also, I just wanted to identify that we did, thanks to a insightful comment from one of our public members, excerpt out some chapters of the element to put in your packet so that you'd have them at hand, so the public would have them at hand. But the entire document is online. The link is in the staff report. We'd encourage folks to read the entire document. It's about 100 pages long. And so with that, I'll transition into process and timeline. So Attachment B provides a detailed breakdown of the process, and I do want to acknowledge that when we went to Parks and Rec Committee, we left off the last page of this. You have the entire 3-page document, which provides high-level summary of the steps that will happen in each of the different review and decision-making bodies, and then sort of a description of why it is that we're processing it that way. And the reason why we're sharing this with the committees is that you have a real good understanding of, why it's before you and how we're bringing it forward to the Planning Commission and City Council. This process is designed to provide efficient review to the City Council. There are some timelines, and clearly we don't want to let the timelines drive the decisions, but there are timelines that we're trying to adhere to. And to the extent that we can process the public participation part, the committee input part expediently, we'll be able to get through that process and provide good suggestions to the council. So the committees can provide recommendation through formal action. We've been at your committee body before. We've had a discussion about the Gateway Area Plan. There were no formal recommendations made. We haven't changed the document as a result of that or shown those changes anywhere. Those discussion points, as we captured them, are reflected back to you in the attachment that shows the table, beginning with the green box. And in that green box, and I'll share this in just a minute.
I think that maybe you're sharing the wrong screen. We don't actually see any slides. It's just a gray box.
Yeah. The green box I'll show you in just a minute when we get into that piece. And I'm in the transition slide that, let's see, I'll go ahead and put something on the screen so it's not as awkward. No problem.
Oh, there we go.
So, I was in the transition slide. My transition went on too long. And so what we're attempting to do is to reflect back to you what you talked about last time and then get a formal recommendation. Now, these recommendations are coming sort of simultaneously. We're going all the committees and commissions simultaneously with this information concurrently. And the idea is that these committees will be able to provide a first pass recommendation within 1 to 3 months of our start time. Staff is going to collect all that information, collate it, and present it to the decision makers. The Planning Commission is a review body, and then the City Council is the decision maker. And that will then be reviewed by the City Council. And the Council is going to take that first pass information and say, okay, these are the elements that we want to change. These are the items that we want to retain. We want to bring these new items in. And all of that will come from, the public comment, the committee's recommendations, Planning Commission's recommendations. And so after that first pass, and they take this first action, there can be a second pass. The second pass, this section takes between 1.5, 3.5 months total. Second pass will be basically, look, this is what the decision makers brought forward. You'll be able to review it again, and then you'll be able to make a final recommendation if you wish to at that point. And that recommendation, in addition, you can make a formal recommendation today, or failure to make a recommendation that's formal will, in a sense, be a statement that it's fine the way it's drafted. So, how are we going to convey the committees and the public's proposed changes to the City Council? So, for those changes or those recommendations that are not policy changes or diversions from the existing policy, they're just affirming existing policy or in line with new policy that's in line with and better explains the city's policy, we're going to actually make edits right into the document. You'll see this both in the general plan elements as well as the Gateway Area Plan. And then we're going to color code them. So green, we've identified some Planning Commission changes. They'll be green. Parks and Rec Committee might be blue. The Energy Committee might be red. And so this way we can show what the recommended changes are and who made those recommendations. Ultimately, the City Council will be able to look at these different changes and then select among them and actually understand where they came from, which body recommended them. And so, for instance, they might weigh the Energy Committee's recommendation on a policy that affects energy policy a little bit more highly than they might take the recommendation of, say, Parks and Rec Committee or something like that. They'll have a means for evaluating those. For policy changes where we have conflicting recommendations or where the policy direction is counter to other policy as we understand it at the staff level in the existing body of documents, We're going to collate these into a table similar to this. I don't know if this will be the exact structure, but this is the way we're assuming it will be now, where we identify the element that the change is talked about in, what the topic is, what the recommendation is. Some folks, for example, for building height said, hey, let's go no higher than 3. Some have said 4 is great limit. Others say 6. We'll identify what the source was. The Planning Commission will have an opportunity to weigh in, and then staff will provide to the decision maker, the city council in this case, the policy implications, what they're going to balance. If you go to 4 stories, you're going to lose some, you're going to have more site coverage, for example, so you're going to lose some public space if you go that route. Or, you can get public space back if you give up on parking, to have that policy conversation with them. So this is how we will share with the city council recommendations of the committee. Now, just another bit on process. We did bring we sent out a tabular format of the policy document to the committee members in advance, so you could take a look at it early. And we had asked to bring those back to staff so that we could collate them. So I've got a revised policy table, which I believe was emailed out to you late today. And we can use this to help organize the discussion. And we have only a couple committee members who had responded to that, all of whom are here today. So that could help facilitate the conversation. So let's see. So basically the ask, I'm going to wrap up here and transition into the materials. We're asking that if you wish to make a formal recommendation, that you commit the time over the next, either this meeting or the next month or so, to go through a process so that you can actually vote on any policy changes that the body as a whole wishes to make recommendation for in the document, and we can carry that forward. And the reason I'm asking for this to be done, timely, is again because some of these deadlines that we've been talking about, we're trying to adhere to those as best we can. We're also trying to make sure that the decision makers can continue to do their work at every level, and so we would ask for expedited review on that. And so to that end, I'm going to transition and share with you the compiled committee responses. And just to say, if you want to, we can start with these general comments that the committee provided the last time we had this discussion. And somebody let me know if this is zoomed in adequately. Okay, and then what we did was we tried to compile where there were multiple comments on a particular policy area. And in this instance, we didn't get any that rose to the level of having a majority of committee members who were interested in a particular policy, but there was a little bit of overlap. And so you may wish to structure your discussion so that you're first looking at, well, what are the policies that we all want to talk about? And then to dig into those policies in greater depth if you want to approach it that way. If you want to stay at the high level like you did last time and talk general comments, that's fine too. Staff will be able to orient to where the policy in the document is and bring language forward that satisfies that policy discussion. Now, I will say in closing that we're hoping that you do not wish to engage in a bunch of wordsmithing in the meeting, but we're happy to follow your lead at your discretion. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I see Jim has a question.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks for that kind of overview. So my question is, when we talk about, so you were talking about sort of policies, I guess, let me step back for just a moment. So the gateway plan will be a part of the general plan, or a plan that's a component to the general plan, and will establish sort of policies and kind of articulate the cities and the city, including city staff and leaders, but also the community as a whole, our desire for how the development should look in this geographic area. And my understanding is that once the plan passes, one of the benefits is then we've articulated to potential developers what we're looking for, and if they come to the city with a proposal to do a development, let's say for multifamily housing or something that that we're looking for in that area, and it meets the guidelines of the Gateway Plan, then the incentive for them is that and maybe for everybody, is it streamlines the process so they don't have to go through as lengthy of a review and an approval process, which makes it cheaper and faster for everybody. And if we've already articulated what we want, and that's what they're proposing, we sort of we all get what we want, and it's done in a more cost-effective and efficient manner. And so I guess one question I have is it sounds like, and when I look at these, this matrix here, there are, I think you were calling them sort of policy elements, and I see them sort of as guidelines. I don't know if they're, so I guess my question is, are there guidelines that would be established that a developer would have to meet along the lines of what's written here before us? But then I've also heard about things like, I want to say, amenities that we may be asking for that aren't requirements, but they're optional features that a developer could offer, and they might offer a mix of amenities, and based on those amenities, there may be an incentive for them to offer those amenities, and maybe it's that they get some other incentive or in the process, or I don't. So I'm just curious a little bit about how the types of things that we are commenting on and then voting on in terms of this plan. I'm not sure if I captured it in terms of guidelines and amenities, but I'm just looking for a little better understanding of the structure, so I know what I'm kind of voting and addressing here. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great comprehensive question, Jim. And we did cover some of this at our first meeting, but I'll revisit just to recontextualize that, because that is a really good point to understand how these recommendations are going to be used. So you have very clearly articulated the overall structure, and so I'm not going to reiterate that piece of it. What I will do is provide a little bit of context. So in terms of the amenities, you're absolutely right. The amenities are kind of groupings of what we would, under a traditional model and a more normal discretionary model, consider conditions of approval. So those of you who have been here through project approvals, you'll see these projects maybe come to the committee, and the committee says, well, I think you ought to do better for energy. So, make sure the building is solar, or make sure the building is net zero. That's going to be our recommendation. And then ultimately those recommendations get carried forward into some type of recommendation for a condition of approval on the project once it's approved. Now, conditions of approval have somewhat limited by law extent. They can't be as expansive as some of the asks that we have in our community amenities. The case law and state law require that conditions of approval on a discretionary project be proportional to that project, and in terms of financial, and be directly related to it. So those are sort of the nexus and proportionality, or Nolan-Dolan, you may have heard in the planning circles. So what we're attempting to do with this plan is to replace the discretionary review process that has had poor results for many large projects, both for the community and for the developer, with a process that is more streamlined, with a process that has more upfront accountability, and a process that has the developer putting their money, instead of into a planning process, into the community, actually building out parks or trails, or adding to energy resiliency, or building out our alternative transportation infrastructure, those kinds of things. And so when a project comes forward, the number and types of those amenities is in part related to the tier they fall into. So I'm showing you a page out of the Gateway Area Plan, and you can see under the base tier, which is allowed in any district, any of the 4 districts, the minimum building height is 2 stories, and there are no community benefits required. They're all conditioned, because this type of project, if they come in at the base tier, that type of project, I'm sorry, Michael, let me zoom in on this for you. that type of project will go through a discretionary process, and it will be conditioned in the normal fashion. The conditions will be limited to nexus and proportionality. Now, once you get into the second tier, and again, these are allowed within any of the neighborhoods, this bonus tier 1, what the developer is getting out of this is the streamlining. So they would be going through a ministerial process, and the community amenities, the community benefits here would be required. And so one of the things that they get out of it is, you'll see here, is slightly larger footprint, bigger height, and there's a minimum residential density. So it's a little bit of trade-off. They get something, we get something. So again, there's no permits, no conditional use, no design review approval. That's discretionary. There's still a design review approval that's ministerial. And so this way, the developer is actually channeling those funds that they would have otherwise spent on our process into the community. Where the specific where those specific actions lie, the specific benefits, is going to be in a zoning ordinance that's associated with this. And so right now, the zoning ordinance is conceived as a form-based code. Form-based codes typically have a higher emphasis on the design, the intersection of the private and public sphere, and have less of an interest in what the uses are that are going on inside of the buildings. We'll still have some limitations. You won't be able to have a heavy industrial use, for example, in one of these new buildings. You would have to have, other uses that are compatible. But for the most part, we're playing a laissez-faire approach to uses. And then that project would then be required to select amongst these, community benefits that could go above and beyond just straight nexus and or proportionality, because we're giving them something instead. And those specific community amenities could be things like net zero building. Now, the way the community amenities are going to be packaged, this was a concern at one of the other committee meetings, is that, well, everybody's just going to rush to the bottom. They're going to pick the cheapest community amenities, and we're going to end up not with all this aspirational stuff that we want, but we're just going to end up with the stuff around the fringes. The document actually describes how the amenities will be organized into tiers. Some things are going to be higher value amenities than others, and the developers will have to select from within that range groupings. And then an idea that has come up since that time in response to the fact that, what if every developer chooses, net zero, which is great for energy policy, but we're not getting any bike infrastructure? How do we, guide that a little bit? And so what we'll be doing is, amongst the amenities within the tiers, creating packages, and so that the developers can come in and select a package deal that has amenities within the entire range of different levels of community amenities. And then once those are gone, then the developers, the subsequent developers, would have to pick new packages with other amenity packages. So we're not going to end up with a tot lot on every single corner. We're going to end up with tot lots dispersed in reasonable proportion throughout the district. And then once we feel like we've satisfied the tot lot requirement for this community, then those packages won't be available anymore. So that's kind of how the process works, where the amenities fall in, and how your decisions on policy will help to guide, yes, we want to have this community amenity program. And I saw some of the recommendations probably are more like amenities that we want to put into those amenities lists, and we can have that discussion as well.
David, maybe just one quick question. When the slide that you have up and the line that says community benefits, and then you talked about the first one is more just the standard thing. And then the next ones, as we go to sort of the higher density, more higher stories and so forth, am I right to assume that the required community benefits as we move from left to right become that there's the package, that there's more amenities as we move to the right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so let's see. I'll find the specific location for you, but basically you're exactly right. you need higher and higher levels of community benefit to get into these higher level tiers. And again, it's the way this is structured, the maximum building height gets higher with the assumption that developers are going to want to maximize their density, but the minimum building height caps out at 3 stories here. And so there may be other things that the developer is trying to do on their property that they want to get into that higher tier community benefit program for.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? This table is extremely helpful, and I had looked at it before, but you put it up again and it clarifies so many things. But for the community, if you scroll just down a little bit so you can see the top of this.
Scroll this way.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, I wanted to, there you go. Yeah, so the community benefits bonus tier 4, sorry, go the other way. I'm just trying to get an understanding of where these things can actually be applied. Because I don't think I had this, the land use designation, the different districts. So when I see like the community benefits bonus tier 4, it says optional for the Gateway Barrel District, but not permitted for the hub, the corridor, or the Gateway neighborhood. So does that mean that, say, I can't go and do all these, high bonus things and put an 8-story building in the Gateway neighborhood area? So I can only, in that area, the bonus tier 1 is like the max you can go. Am I understanding that correct?
You absolutely are. Yeah, that's exactly right. 8-story buildings are only allowed as an optional in the Gateway Barrel District. The Gateway neighborhood, which is intended to be a transition district, would only allow for 5. And in fact, if you look at many of the properties in that transition neighborhood, many of those properties aren't even going to qualify for 5-story buildings because the lots are too small.
Right.
And so some of that detail is going to be in the form-based code.
Excellent. And I realize that this is pretty getting far off energy committee topics, but thank you for that. This was super clarifying for me. All right.
Yeah.
So do we have any other committee comments on this sort of more general stuff? Or we can go on to our more specific energy-based topic.
Onward.
All right. So I guess, maybe the place to start is going through the list that was in our packet. It looks like Michael, Jim, and I put a few comments in. I don't know, Mike, if you had a chance to look through it before the meeting, and if you had any opinions about it. If not, we can go through this, the stuff that we had commented on. The stuff that I thought was fine, I just left blank as was, directed. So I'm assuming the other folks who went through that did the same. So it just seems like it would be helpful to check in with Mike to see if either you just didn't have time to look through it or.
Yeah, I didn't have enough time. I skimmed it before the meeting, but certainly not enough to offer kind of thoughtful comments.
Got it. Okay.
So one point of order, you may wish to take public comment at this point if you don't have any more questions about the overall staff report or what we're doing here tonight.
Sure, I can take public comment. Are there members of the public who would like to comment?
Yes, I see a few hands going up. So
looks like we got at least 3. So Jim looks like
yep. Okay, great.
And so we're doing 2 minutes per speaker.
Yep. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
Hello, staff and committee members. This is James Becker. I am actually also a member of RGA, part of the proposed Gateway District and one of the Devlin Cottages, a longtime business co-owner and a carpenter. And I'm following up on the Energy Committee's previous discussion on solar shading, and I wanted to encourage the committee to work with staff to develop language for objective design standards through form-based codes. Form-based codes can define structures, siting, setbacks, and stepbacks of new infill and existing neighborhoods. Neighborhoods may present unique situations, but desired end results will be the same. Preserving solar right-of-ways, that would ultimately be the goal. And by preserving the solar shading, it can also help with the cities working towards zero net. And anyway, just gives you a little bit of a seed planted there, but the main emphasis is on working with objective design standards and also building that into form-based codes, which will be developed in the process of this and can strengthen the language that way. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
It looks like next we've got Chris Richards. Hand up.
Okay, Chris.
Hello again. I don't have a whole lot for this segment, but just a few things. I wanted to reminisce back at one of your previous meetings when you guys had requested some solar shading, 3D modeling to help determine what effect that would be in different areas. And I know David's been working with a group to try to get that completed, and that hasn't happened. But I definitely think you guys need that to be able to do some kind of definitive decision making on the effects with solar shading on other buildings and all of that stuff. Even So anyway, hopefully David can bring that forth pretty soon. The other thing would be some of the other groups, the other committees have been using. They've been going to a special meeting to allow themselves to have more time to deal with this. I mean, it's such an elaborate process that's obviously you would never have enough time, especially with the constraints that we're working with. But, a subcommittee is one option. A special meeting would be another option. And the two of the other committees have already moved in that direction. So that definitely helps free them up some extra time to work through the template that you guys are looking at and trying to figure out what are we going to do with all this and what can we make out of it. Anyway, thank you. And again, I appreciate all of what you do. And I look forward to some well thought through recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
And then looks like Una Smith next.
Yes. Hi, Una.
Hi, thank you. Una Smith, I am right now here on behalf of the Humboldt County Association of Governments, which is the regional transportation planning agency. And our overall comments on the whole gist of the Gateway Plan is that the intention of this plan is very much in alignment with our 20-year regional transportation plan. In particular, HCOG's long-term planning definitely supports infill and supports walkable communities and supports policies that enhance bike and transit modes, and also supports electrification as one strategy for cleaner air, as well as helpful for climate adaptation and the climate crisis. Also, the overall goals that the Gateway Plan is going for is very much in line with the new chapter we have in our updated RTP, and that chapter we call Renewing Our Communities. And it is basically an approach to building vibrant communities through a more human scale development as opposed to the more car-centric development that has happened in the last few generations. It also seeks to use land with higher values than car storage and higher speed car driving. We also believe that this will help our region have cities that are more fiscally healthy and can stay solvent. So we appreciate that part and support the plan in that. And then for the particular policies, I have just 4 comments that are transportation, but I'm trying to minimize them to the ones that are more energy committee related. And one is
Una, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that was 2 minutes.
Okay. Then those ones I will write and send through staff to committee members.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Una.
Great. Patricia. Hi, Patricia.
Hello. My name is Patricia Kambianica, and I've spoken with you before about solar shading, and Jim and Chris actually said a lot of what I wanted to say. I just kind of wanted to reiterate some of the same concerns or that they had. So I know I was hoping that we could. I know we're trying to get away from the natural gas usage with the new development and turn towards a more, electric focus. I'd like to have there be more wordage and a little bit more clarity on that, and also maybe a more focus on the EV charging stations as well. And then I would also really like to see a 3D modeling come out soon. It's a little disconcerting. It hasn't come out yet. I know it was supposed to come out with the release of the draft of the Gateway Area Plan. I'm not sure why it didn't, but I think it would really help you guys to actually give some really more in-depth recommendations. And there's also, I know the vast majority of the feedback coming from the community says overwhelmingly that they would like to see 3 to 4 stories max. But also, I'm not sure where that's going, but I'd like to see setbacks at 3 stories and recommend that. And also have a little bit more setback on some of the side streets or in areas next to residential, existing residential housing, have setbacks that are farther away from the sidewalk, so not on the lot line on those side streets. And then also, I would really hope to see a special meeting or maybe a subcommittee, so you guys can really can make some really in-depth recommendations. I think this is a great committee. I'm really impressed by your knowledge, and so I'd like to see you guys be able to put some of those recommendations in your own language, and so there's no misinterpretation of what your goals and what you would like to see with this Gateway Plan.
Thank you, Patricia. That was a few minutes.
All right. Thank you so much for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you.
And it looks like Una's got her hand raised again, but I don't know if that's from last time or. Oh, she just lowered it.
Okay. Lowered it. It's still there. I will just check with her. Una, raise your hand again.
Yeah, I'd like to comment as Una, a resident of Arcata.
Okay, great.
So this has nothing to do with my job. I read the Planning Commission comments and also responding to comments you just heard. And I've seen Planning Commissioners' written comments saying very few Arcadans or hardly any Arcadans want tall buildings, and very few Arcadans want 8-story buildings. I don't know if we know that. And I am a resident who is not against 8-story buildings. I am open to a plan that allows 8-story buildings in context of other amenities we might get for it. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Una. Right. So it looks like we've gotten through all of our public comments. So with that, I guess we can move on to a committee discussion. Pull up my chart that has our comments on it. Potentially based on the things that we actually commented on, the 3 of us that had a chance to review.
Yeah, and I've got the compiled table here, if that'll be helpful for going through. One of the original sort of ideas was that where there was a lot of overlap, then you would be able to discuss those because you only have 4. I guess it's up to your discretion whether you want to just jump into these 4 policy areas and discuss them all, or do you want to go through some more rigorous vetting process for finding those points for discussion.
I guess that's a question for other committee members.
I mean, I like the idea of certainly prioritizing the ones that folks have already commented on.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. I thought I might have cut someone off there. So I think I'm assuming that the W was Michael and I know the Z was me, I think. So, and I think the one, on that first item, I think one thing, so Michael and I did kind of make somewhat similar comments. And then I see that there's a sort of modified language to the right there. And I think what's been modified is in red and underlined. And I guess the one point, I don't know that this is necessary, but the one distinction I would make that I think both Michael and I noted, but doesn't show up in the modification, is that so when infrastructure is being planned for this area, the Gateway area, certainly planning for the development that's the new development is going to be placed there is obviously obviously a necessity. But I think that the two things, and maybe you could say that for that new infrastructure, that it will just be taken into account. But the fact that there is a real emphasis here, and I'm focusing more on the electrical demand than the wastewater, given that this is the Energy Committee, that's kind of a little more of our focus. But that the push, and I think even it shows up kind of in the amenities here for electrification, right? And there are goals within the city, and the Energy Committee has been working on this for quite some time, moving toward electrification in our buildings. So and hopefully eventually retiring the natural gas system, though that's going to take some longer term time and effort. But certainly for new construction, and then also electrification of the transportation sector, so that those things are going to create additional electrical load. And it may even be that there are existing buildings within the Gateway area that may not be new development, but they may be converting to all electric or to electric transportation, things like that. So I think that was the one thing that I don't necessarily see articulated, but again, it may just be captured when somebody is going through the process of the design for these new facilities, that it's just part of the process that they take into account the fact that things are going to be all electric and there's going to be electrified transportation. So it may not be necessary, but I just thought I'd point that out.
One point that I was trying to make is that this is the development of infrastructure is going to need to be phased and planned in that way. It's not all going to happen at one time. And so I think we would need some kind of a time horizon there in the planning that we do for putting in additional infrastructure.
Does this kind of capture what you're talking about, Jim?
Yes, it does, David. And somebody could wordsmith it a bit, but that is what I was getting at.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, just process-wise, what I'm going to do is sort of capture all of these. We'll capture the discussion, changes, modifications that come through the discussion. Again, wordsmithing them now is probably not the best use of our time. We can take your general concepts and go back and wordsmith them at the staff level. But then when you get to a point, you say, as a body, you say, look, let's take a vote on this. Either, you're all going in different directions. You're not going to be able to come together on a recommendation, or you come together on a recommendation, you take a straw poll vote, and then we can move on. And then I'll know that ultimately is going to be included in your formal action on this. So we'll identify those changes.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Any other points on this topic, on this particular line item?
Michael Winkler, did you have a comment on this one? I thought I heard you say something. I'm not sure if that got captured, though.
Oh, what I was saying is that increased infrastructure is not going to all happen at one time, so we should have a time horizon of and a process for phasing it in as we need to add additional infrastructure. Some of it would make the most sense to put it in near the beginning of the process, and other is expanded as we do additional development over the time horizon of the gateway development.
Yeah, and so just so I'm clear, and maybe so the committee is too, Michael, are you suggesting that that be voiced in policy, or that we actually outline a timeline in this policy document? Because I would think that the former is doable. I would think that the latter would probably not be effective. And we could.
I was thinking the former, that
okay.
That would be outlined as something that would be needed, but it wouldn't be specifically in this document.
Okay. If I could go a next step, I would add that, the capital improvement program is really where we see that near-term planning horizon, the 5-year timeline planning horizon for infrastructure improvements. And so if you wouldn't mind a friendly modification, I would just add that the CIP will reflect near-term infrastructure needs.
And that would include energy-related infrastructure and infrastructure that's not energy-related directly.
Yep.
All right, anything else, committee members? We move on to the next item that was commented on. There are several that nobody had any comments on, but.
So I guess just a process question, Andre. David, were you suggesting that we need to vote on each of these, or?
At some point you will, yeah. And if you want to, you can do it item by item. It sounds like there's pretty close alignment on these proposed changes. I'm sort of getting the warm fuzzies. So you could probably move on from that. If you get to a point where you're like, we definitely want to lock this in, you can make that one by one vote. Or if you're just, scattered to the winds, there's no way that you're going to come together. I would recommend as a point of order that someone take a motion and you go through those procedural steps to resolve the fact that you're not coming together, basically. But it sounds like on this one, you came together. We can go on to the next one. And maybe if you get through the next one, you wind up getting through all of them, then you could just come back and vote for them en masse.
That sounds good. I mean, I guess I would be in favor of trying to vote for them en masse. Okay. That sounds good to the rest of the committee members. I don't see a whole lot of divergent things. So our next one is it's kind of similar, I would say, to the last one.
Yeah, this one was just that. This one was encouraging efficient water use, and so I just suggested that they include. I mean, it's kind of, yeah. Anyway, I just suggested they include efficient energy use as well. But it's you can't build in California now and not focus on efficient energy use. But nonetheless, it seemed worth it to add just to be consistent.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point, Jim, and I think that we're soon going to struggle to be able to provide higher energy efficiencies than are required by state law. And I fully expect that the state will surpass us at some point in the future. But, in the near term, if someone is going to come in and do an all-electric net zero building, that's above and beyond what the building code requires. That's way above and beyond what we could require in a condition of approval. But I do think that's the direction we want to see ourselves go. Some of that will get, overtaken if we adopt a local all-electric ordinance. But even the all-electric isn't going to require that they're net zero, for example. So we'll have incremental amenities that are associated with that. Once we get to the point, this is a good area where we would have those package deals. Once we get to the point where the state has surpassed us, and if we can't think of other feasible energy efficiency improvements or energy generation improvements, that would tie to that net zero requirement, we would just have no more packages, no more amenity packages that allowed for a net zero building, because it was already allowed for or required by law, rather.
Well, it's possible to go beyond net zero. That, for instance, that heat pumps inherently produce hot and cold. That better than net zero would be that you use both the hot and cold production of the heat pump simultaneously. So that can take you to even higher levels than net zero, for instance. Or you can have use your energy in a way that's beneficial to the operation of the overall grid. So even that isn't directly energy, it's a benefit that's being provided by how the equipment is being operated and controlled.
If we need to
Good points that are way beyond my league.
Yeah, that'll be a good problem to have, Michael, when we are we're having to do.
And the other one is that GA11K also mentions efficiency. So I don't know if adding that to 11A would be necessary, since, and you can take a look at 11K and see if you think that covers that area, Jim.
Yeah, I was kind of curious as to, I didn't have the context of this in the plan, so it might have just been pulled out of a section that was mainly on water. And I feel like what was just said about, you can't build an energy inefficient building in California is going to be the same with water. You can't build a water waster building in California either. So.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally agree. And I think these are things that, we suggested here, microgrids and eco blocks as ways that we might be able to incrementally step above what's required by code. And I don't recall, has the Energy Committee been presented with the eco block concept, or are you familiar with?
I'm familiar with it because I'm on their technical advisory committee, but I don't know that we were ever received anything. I remember it was brought up, I think, at the last meeting, but.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just say real quickly then, what this is, what the idea is here, since it's mentioned in the staff report, and Jim, you can correct me if I misstep here, because I've only been presented with the information two times. But my understanding, just super high level synopsis, is that, Cal Berkeley is working on a sort of the legal framework and then a programmatic pilot project that essentially would take a group of buildings. The idea is to get whole blocks at a time that are in close proximity, that are in disadvantaged communities to start with, and working with them to electrify that group of buildings, create a microgrid that's based on that group of buildings, and even maybe go so far as to have electric car share that they all buy into, with battery backup, and you're kind of creating this little micro resiliency hub. And so, that's something that there's no way we could require that type of investment in a project level or in a group of buildings level. But the legal framework is being developed right now, and so that could be an amenity that look, if some project will come in and build that out, that microgrid, and offer those amenities, enter into that legal agreement amongst the various participants in that project, that could be a great community amenity that we're it takes additional money to build out, and it's not likely to ever be, or not in my lifetime anyway, part of the California codes. So that we can stair step. I think we can start with the easy stuff that we can get now, net zero buildings, and then we can stair step into more complicated, more expensive things that will ultimately benefit the project overall. So I think it's true that most of this stuff, if you start talking Title 24, we're going to be outpaced by the state in relatively short order. But if we get creative, we can include those amenities that will stair step us into a better energy situation.
David, I think you did a good job. I think articulating, kind of I think the basic concept for the eco block. I think one thing that has happened though is that they you were talking about sort of the legal structure, and they wanted to be able to create a situation where there was kind of community solar or solar on some roofs that could be shared, the power could be shared across multiple households, so that you didn't have to have solar on every household, basically. And they ended up kind of the airport project that we just completed here in McKinleyville. We worked with PG&E, and that microgrid is capable of islanding and serving multiple facilities at the end of the line there that are multiple PG&E accounts. So when the switch opens, it's still a bunch of PG&E still owns and operates the distribution line and is still serving multiple customers, but RCEA owns the solar and batteries that is actually providing the power. But that's only in the islanded case. When they're not islanded, then RCEA is participating in the wholesale market, and it's PG&E. PG&E won't allow you to utilize their lines to distribute power, except for under this microgrid tariff, where you're doing it because you're islanded and you're just providing resilience to critical facilities. I think there are a lot of people that would like to see what the EcoBlock original concept was, and we may get there. But there's, it was a big step just for PG&E to do what we've done at the airport, and so kind of the EcoBlock would be a next step that might be a little further in the future.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. And it may be easier to do, with some of the, like on a project level, than it would be on on a multiple project level. And so if you had, a building that had, multiple PG&E connections, but it was all within the same building, there could be some sharing that happens there. But I totally agree. Yeah. There are still legal systems that we need to develop.
Yeah.
So do we have any other discussions for this particular item? I mean, it doesn't look like there's any sort of suggested policy change or things to vote on.
Yeah, I don't know. Were these your comments, Michael? I think they probably were. I don't know if you were suggesting different language. I do see what you're saying, that this is maybe a little bit redundant with the one above that was about water, and if we added energy to it. But
well, I think we could reference 11K under 11G is the way I was thinking about it, as being related as promoting green infrastructure.
Yep, that seems fine.
So for 11K, then we don't really have any additional changes. I mean, I don't see anything that we would vote on as a committee for that one. I think Michael made some comments, but it sounds like that stuff is in the works.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
All right. So we've got 11. What is it? I or L? Utility undergrounding. This is an
L. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just say from the staff perspective, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, in some areas we have very expensive, it's almost cost prohibitive to underground because of water table and so on and so forth. And so, I think that this makes a lot of sense as a recommendation to add as a and or that we would do undergrounding where it's, feasible and otherwise work to improve the above ground infrastructure. I'd love it if there was some above ground infrastructure enhancements in my neighborhood. I have a beautiful view of the foothills with a big power line right in front of it. So yeah, if we could do something about that, I'd appreciate it.
The one place I think where undergrounding is being discussed as a perhaps worth the cost is in terms of or there's really serious fire danger, and if you underground the lines, you remove the fire danger for all practical purposes. But I don't think there's a huge issue in the gateway area of, towering trees where branches are falling on lines and starting fires. That doesn't really seem like that's an issue. So.
Yeah, I think this is probably primarily driven by aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I like undergrounded lines. I think it looks much nicer to not see the power lines, but
yeah,
it's also expensive. So
yeah,
I understand. But if you're going to do it when it's new development, is the least expensive time to do it. So, I mean, I can imagine encouraging it for new development, not necessarily mandating it for existing development.
And David, you had made a comment just in your kind of suggestion about doing it when feasible. What sort of criteria would kind of determine whether or not it's feasible? You mentioned water table, and certainly cost, but whether you or anybody else on the committee, if anyone's able to kind of who knows more about it, I don't really know that much about it, and speak more to that. That'd be interesting. Like, so for example, with cost, what would be considered feasible, maybe with reference to normal above ground utilities, like twice the cost, or 50% more, or 5 times more?
I think that ultimately, when we look at the package of amenities that are being proposed within the gateway, that has to be compared against cost reasonableness and feasibility of project development. The way that I've described it before is, I would like to drive a Ferrari, but I drive a Toyota because it's just infeasible for me to drive a Ferrari. And so we can want a Ferrari level of development out of this planning process. And many people have actually said, hey, why are you having these amenities? The project should just be delivering all of those things to us anyway. But what we've seen over time through several projects that have been proposed and approved in Arcata is that as they've wound through our process and had conditions of approval overlaid from each of the various committees and so on and so forth, they become overburdened, and then they're never built out because it's not, the developer is saying all along, yes, I'll take that, yes, I'll take it, because they just want to get an approval. And then once they get the approval, they go to sit down and pencil it out. It doesn't pencil anymore. And so if we create a plan that says we want a Ferrari and all we can afford is a Toyota, all the market will bear is a Toyota, we're not going to get a Toyota and we're not going to get a Ferrari, because the Ferrari is cost infeasible, and the Toyota, we're saying we don't want it. You can't build the Toyota. So what I mean when I say it's feasible is that given the overall development cost structure, and some of this may need to be proved through project level pro forma, but when you take into consideration the entire cost burden for development, including any subsidies that may come into the project, that you can still build the project. Now, I don't have specifics for you on what the additional cost would be for undergrounding, but what I can tell you is that we've had an undergrounding district. In fact, I think just increased the size of it near the downtown, in and around the downtown, and we've continuously generated money into that fund that is for that purpose, and it's match funds, I believe. I think there's an agency that will help us. It's probably PG&E that will help us to underground when time comes. And we've had this for like 20 years, and we've done very little undergrounding when it comes right down to it because it's just too expensive. So that's just for a standard. I think we do want to see it as an aspiration. If we can get, our downtown and our near downtown neighborhoods undergrounded, that would be great from an aesthetic point of view, from a public safety point of view, and from a land utilization point of view. But yeah, that's kind of what I mean when I say feasible. We'll have to, assess, does undergrounding actually pencil for projects? And if not, maybe they contribute to a fund, and then ultimately, when we have enough money, we can underground. That could be a way of going about it as well.
David, the other thing that comes to mind for me, and I sort of read it into Michael's comments there, but it's not really explicitly stated. But if we are pushing, I mean, if we say we want to do undergrounding, if it's feasible, but if it's feasible, and is still very costly, and it's feasible only if we give up a bunch of other amenities. I mean, I guess that's where I see at some point there's this trade-off, and if we're trying to achieve things like, these better transportation corridors and a lot of these other things that I think many of us in the community want to see for many reasons, for just a more livable community, for addressing climate change, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, yeah, I would love. I mean, I think undergrounding is wonderful as well. But at some point, it's like, okay, if I can have, bike paths and a bunch of other things, and you add them all up, or I can have undergrounding. I'm going to say, you know what? I can deal with the wires. They're everywhere we go. Let's just live with the wires and let's get all these other things, because that'll make a greater, be more valuable to the community, I think. So I think that's just one place. To be considered, one thing to be considered. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other comments before moving on? All right.
Okay. So Michael, you had a couple of proposed additional programs
At the bottom of page 4, you're talking about, David?
Yeah, this one here. Can you still see my screen? Sometimes it goes away. Okay.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Well, I was saying that we should incentivize or require for all new developments in the Gateway project streamlining process to require that space heating and water heating and be done with electric heat pumps. I mean, even if it's all electric, if you're doing it with electric resistance, that's not very appealing. It may not even be possible under Title 24, but I think we should be explicit about that. And for cooking, induction seems to work the best. Although a lot of high-end restaurants are starting to use induction now, there's some restaurant owners who swear by gas and want to use gas. And so if that is the case and it's being put in, they should pay all the costs associated with that. And even if they want it, we could also encourage them to use propane rather than natural gas, so that we wouldn't have to put in natural gas lines.
That seems like the kind of thing, and I don't know, maybe it makes sense to put it here, but that would go into like an all electric ordinance.
Yes. But what we don't know is whether we're going to be adopting the council is going to be adopting the Gateway plan before they adopt the all electric ordinance. We don't know the time sequencing between those two actions.
So
yeah, I mean, I guess
to put the all electric basically ordinance or requirement within the Gateway area.
Is that what you were suggesting, Andrea? Because that's what I was thinking. What you were suggesting.
Well, I guess that's what I'm wondering, if that's what Michael's suggesting.
That's what I'm suggesting, is to have it in there, and at worst it would be redundant or complementary with the citywide all electric ordinance for new construction.
One thing that I would mention, just because there has been so much public participation and really stakeholder participation in particular around the all electric ordinance, is that you may want to keep that in its own lane. That if you try and bake it into this, in the event that it moves forward before the Gateway moves forward before the all electric ordinance, I think that we won't have the same level of transparency and vetting in this document for those items. So that's just something to consider. And I think that at this point, that would be sort of the policy balancing concept that we'd put forward to the City Council if this came as a recommendation out of the committee.
One possibility is to make it aspirational in the gateway document rather than hard coded. And if we're going to be relying on the citywide electrification ordinance to do sort of the detailed implementation.
Could we somehow reference the citywide electrification plan? I mean, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but it certainly seems like we're headed to adopt some sort of plan. And if there's additional public comment and additional decision making that needs to be done there before we end up with something that is, that the decision makers can approve and the community, embraces, or at least largely embraces, then this could just, fall back on that. But since we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, I don't know if that's much different than what Michael just said. But I guess the only risk there is if we don't ever end up with an ordinance, then we're referring to something here that would never exist. So I don't know if that's problematic.
I do think that, again, because the ordinance approach essentially mandates. The incentive program under the amenities is a self-selected, group of project amenities. And so I do think that, maybe if, this electrification concept came under here, the incentivized energy efficiency, and then this,
it does incentivize energy efficiency and electrification. It does say that.
Yeah. And then those specific details about what the amenities package should look like. Some of this more detailed, list here. Those can actually be included in the form-based code as the specific amenities that we'd be looking to implement.
Yeah, that seems like a good approach to me. So, if you're saying, incentivize electrification, it's like, then you have to say, well, what does that mean? And these are the types of things that means, and that would be in the code. I think that makes sense.
I would agree. I think while we want to be explicit enough here to not leave things to be too vague, we don't need to get too far into the weeds on everything either. So.
Yep.
And potentially
we get warm fuzzies on that.
Yep, I think so.
Okay.
And is that sort of a similar thing for the pre-treatment? Would that be a potential incentive also, offering a sewer pre-treatment on site is that what you were suggesting, Michael?
That's what I was suggesting, either having it as an amenity or I guess what we've been doing as a city is if somebody does it themselves, then we can make it beneficial for them to do so, even though, and if they don't do it, then we charge them for discharging high strength waste. So.
Yeah, I think that, in all likelihood, our sewer ordinance is going to outpace this as an amenity. The fee structure for high waste is really set up as a disincentive to using it. We really try and encourage folks to, to get their own pretreatment. And so any user who has high strength waste rather, periodically may find it advantageous to, go ahead and pay that additional fee for waste disposal. But anybody who's doing it regularly is going to find that, it's more cost effective to do pretreatment. So I'll add tentatively right now that we'll add these in the list of community amenities, and then I'll work with ES to make sure that, I'm on target with that. And Emily Bimby, I don't know if you have insights into that, or Morgan, that you could weigh in on now.
I don't offhand, David, but I'd be happy to chat more with you once we can connect with our wastewater division.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Is there any other comment on this one? Move on to our next item. Right. So I put a comment here, and I know you don't want wordsmithing, David, but there's your list, and it's vehicles, trucks, transit, bicycles, and pedestrians. And I see those lists, and I want to flip them. So that it's in, what are we trying to prioritize? Let's put that in front of the list rather than, vehicles. So that's my only wordsmithing comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we could just drop vehicles and trucks out of there.
Right. I mean, I get I get you need vehicles and say, but it's like if we really want to human scale mobility, let's put the bicycles and the pedestrians at the front.
Yeah, I'm with you. Maybe.
And I'll work on the language here, but
yeah,
all
that just you don't need to put it on there, but that's just my comment. I see, and it's not just here; it's like all kinds of places, and so I like to point that out whenever I can.
no, I think that's a really good point. We did intend. I mean, that is the stated intent of this. We recognize, single passenger vehicles of all types are not disappearing tomorrow, no matter how hard we wish them to be. We're not going to suddenly have a world-class, transit system, no matter how hard we wish it to be. But if we don't start building out that infrastructure now, if we don't emphasize it and encourage it in this policy document, we're just never going to have it. And so that is clearly the emphasis of this plan. So thank you for that. And we'll look for that throughout. Oops.
And can you throw in a comment about electric there? Because you can have electric bicycles or you can have electric skateboards and things like that are sort of intermediate between pedestrian and full-size cars.
Okay. How about if I leave it at this, Michael? Because again, I think the conversation around, for example, the bird e-scooters and other forms of having electric bikes on our trail systems, and it's just really complicated if we just threw it out as a catch-all. As a catch-all. And I think if we say electronic, alternative electric vehicles, that allows for some smoothing to make sure that they're compatible and consistent with other bodies of regulation.
Okay.
All right. So moving on, unless anyone has any other comments on this one.
I guess the only other one thing I would say is even moving transit up as a
yeah. In my head, like
in the list as well, but
the list is totally flipped.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that catch.
And so I think this comment is maybe from our last meeting discussion and is this was this a change from the last time or?
Which comment was that?
Well, it's planned for class 4 rather than class 2 bike lanes. And that's under the column that's like relevant committee comment. So and I think that was a comment maybe that Carice made last time, but I'm not sure.
Is that, David, can you scroll up just a little bit? I think there was, I don't know if that,
yeah,
is that what you were talking, right there? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. There? I don't know if there's anything to discuss. I don't think there was additional comments added.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for that. I think the policy discussion around this, and I am not sure. It seems to me that what Dilo, who put this table together, was trying to indicate is that there was this comment last time that is embedded in this particular change here.
Okay.
And I do think that that's a point of clarification that the committee needs to make. I know there was one committee member who was particularly interested in seeing this change. The reality is that we can't we can emphasize class 4, but there are going to be certain areas where it's impossible to put a class 4, without significantly disrupting other components of the gateway. And so we can dig into that in more detail, but And unfortunately, that committee member isn't here today, but
But I guess it does, this is a change from the last time, a potential change that it was sort of incorporated.
yeah, so it's shown how it could be incorporated here. This isn't actually changed at this point. I think that, ultimately, again, if the committee wanted to make this change, I think the council would have to weigh, where those potential conflicts between adding a class 4 and, the other, policy areas that we're trying to balance. I mean, if for example, class 4 lanes were added to K Street, we have a proposed bike lane on K Street, and if all of those became, separated bike lanes, it could significantly impact, other, amenities that we're trying to, derive out of improvements to K Street, such as, wider sidewalks, efficient vehicular traffic throughput, and those kinds of other things. And so, that would be, policy direction that I think, in isolation makes a lot of sense. I think we'd all agree with, but, in totality, there are going to be many areas where there are conflicts. And one of the things that we want to try and do in advance is if we see those potential conflicts, that we resolve them ahead of time. The undergrounding discussion was a perfect example of where, yes, we'd all like to have undergrounding, but not at the expense of some of these other, community features. So I guess this would be a good one for the committee to weigh in on, whether you want to recommend this change or if you're satisfied with the class 2, and then maybe add some language that, to the extent, practicable. And I think this is already supported in the plan, is that we want to have class 4s wherever we can have them, but not demand that every new bike lane be a class 4.
And is there language right now, David, that emphasizes what you just said, that the preference is for class 4, but that it's, but it's not mandatory? Is that kind of what this is saying? Or?
I don't believe there is that exact language currently. Here, let me read to you what the existing language reads. But I think we can get there. I think we can, with a couple of easy changes, we can get there. So right now, let's see, GA7B says, well, of course, this is a super long one, but in that section it says, under E, throughout the entire plan area, class 2 bicycle facilities, standard bike lanes may be converted to class 4 bicycle facilities. That is protected bike lanes. Okay, so this is where, I guess this is the critical word that would need to be changed. Mm-hmm. Shall be converted, I think, is the discussion point. I think may be converted could be maybe upsized a little bit. Should be converted where feasible, or something to that extent, mm-hmm. or should be converted where conflicts don't arise, or something to that effect.
Right, or amenable or something.
I was just going to say, I got a question about, so bullet point E here that we're talking about. First, just a point of clarification. Is that in the existing language already?
Yes.
Point E is. Okay, so the word may, M-A-Y, is currently in the language.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the recommendation.
And then again, that bullet point E there could essentially be an amenity that a developer chooses to include in their project plan, right?
Yeah, well, with some of these, it's possible that if a developer has a bike lane plan to go through their property or is immediately adjacent to it, could be that they develop that segment. I think with some of these, we would likely have a fee program so that the city could plan and execute projects that are high priority for the city. And so where the project happens, it may not be the highest priority to create the new class 2 or class 4 bike lane, but that developer might really be into bike lanes and want to support that bike infrastructure. And so perhaps they, buy a package of amenities that, includes, indoor bike parking and bike lockers, and also contributes to, the trail system. And then the city would use those funds to build out that class 2 or class 4 trail. And really what this says is that existing class 2 bicycle facilities may be converted to class 4. And so we would, this is talking about areas where you have an existing bike facility. And I think that, to get at this in a little more detail, we could add language like, class 4 bike lanes are preferred when practical and, not in conflict with other, plan amenities. And so, existing class 2 standard bike lanes may be converted or should be converted where feasible or something to that extent. And then that would emphasize the class 4 a little bit more, give a nod towards, wanting to have those better bike lanes, but also recognize that, they're not possible in all situations.
So in other words, they could, instead of maybe building a class 4 bike lane on or adjacent to their property, they could pay into a fund that would help convert class 2 to class 4 elsewhere. Yeah. And I mean, last thing here on this that I'll say, I mean, in the spirit of not getting too far into wordsmithing, if that bullet point E is already in the language, I think that's fine. I mean, there it is right there talking about switching class 2 to class 4. And just like you said, going back to the idea of, there's certain things you might want, but you can't necessarily have everything. I think this is fine the way it is. Unfortunately, well, I think it's fine the way it is.
I think it's fine. The only other thing I was thinking is that you would want to make things class 4 in locations that would provide the greatest benefit and not just sort of randomly do it.
Right. I mean, if one development has a class 4 for a half a block and then, and that's it, it's sort of like, that's not very valuable. But if there's a class 4 lane that goes, for 10 or 12 blocks, that's a main thoroughfare that gets used regularly, that would be of much more value. I mean, I like, David, what you said about, emphasizing the preference for class 4 and maybe where it does provide the greatest benefit. But yeah, but not at the expense of a lot of all the other amenities.
Right. We beaten that one enough?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Now, this also, just to kind of think through this a little bit, there's still some oversight and review of these. We're going to have policies that we have to balance as we go forward, and I think these kinds of discussions are important. I also think that where there's a programmatic decision, the committees are going to be able to weigh in on these over time. And staff will, certainly be checking in, and reporting back, monitoring how these are rolling out and finding out, where do we need to, make minor tweaks to improve our understanding, recognizing that, yes, we want to try and get to class 4. I mean, policy language is always going to be a little, there's going to be some interpretation. And what we think we're saying now, our future selves are going to have to come back and revisit and make sure that we're still on track. So I think this gets at it. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. Moving on. I think our next bullet is the balanced transportation system. And Michael had some comments on there.
Well, it's both a bicyclist and a pedestrian. I see the trade-offs between bicycle safety and pedestrian safety and choices that we made in laying out streets in non-traditional ways.
I would offer. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Michael, but I don't really see where the wording in this. I mean, I don't even see, it doesn't say anything about bulb outs or anything. It just says create and maintain a balanced transportation system with choice of bus, transit, bicycle, and pedestrian, as well as private automobile modes. Reduce the percentage of trips that are made by automobiles and provide the community with and the opportunity and facilities to divert trips from automobiles to other modes. I don't.
It may not be applicable to this section. It was on my mind when I was thinking about things about complete streets. It may belong in another section, but it was a thought of trade-offs and choices that we make in layouts of streets within the gateway area.
Got it. Yeah, there might. I think there was something mentioned somewhere about bulb outs, perhaps, but it might have.
Yeah, I saw bulb outs, although it might not have been best to put it in this section, because I've noticed that when I'm bicycling, that sometimes I feel like I have to dodge bulb outs, which are designed to make it safer for pedestrians. And so I feel like I'm in more danger from the bulb outs than if they weren't there. And then also it can shrink the area for parking, which can have an overflow effect in nearby neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think I could certainly carry this comment forward to the Transportation Safety Committee for their consideration. I think that there are definitely, there are those trade-offs. I mean, I'm thinking of, when you're coming down 8th Street, for example, just past, 11th, as you're crossing into, the plaza for the first time, you basically merge. There's a right-hand turn lane, and the bikes have to merge. The bike lane merges over. I personally feel safe doing that, but I'm a daily commuter. I can imagine a lot of people who would be terrified of having to cross into traffic like that, which gets back to the discussion about Class 4 bike lanes, I guess. But it would be impossible without shutting down traffic and making it so that you couldn't have a right-hand turn at 11th Street. It would be impossible to, create a Class 4 lane in that situation. So that's a good example where, there are definitely some trade-offs. We can carry this forward to the TSC.
Okay, that sounds like a good solution.
That's good. And I'll just note, as a pedestrian, I trip on those bulb outs because they just are in the way. The other day, I almost tripped on one. So yeah, planned enhanced transit lanes.
We'll move on from that one.
I think we can move on to that one. So non-motorized campus layouts. And my comment was on here, and this is my another one of my little sticking points of just like we should have more paid parking, and not just in the Gateway District. I would just say free parking is never free, so we shouldn't make it free. But yeah. I won't go too far into that. But
well, you know the book on that, The High Cost of Free Parking, don't you, Andrea?
I do not, but maybe I need to.
You should. I don't know if I think the City of Arcata may own a copy of that, actually. It's a classic on the topic.
And then the other thing is, like, I work at Cal Poly, and if you get a parking ticket and you pay it, it doesn't go to the people who gave you the ticket. It goes into our alternative transportation fund. So, utilizing those funds from parking to get fewer cars on the street. But I don't know if that is it. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I can. If the committee wants to recommend this, I can look into it in more detail. I think the idea is to try and drive parking towards a pay model. The idea is to reduce the allowed parking, except in certain circumstances where, for example, if someone were to put in a parking structure, they could have excess parking, but then that parking structure would be servicing the entire area, not just, one project, as a means of trying to support alternative transportation systems from that node. And then, certainly, we have policies that look to, even if you live in an apartment building, that the parking isn't necessarily free, and part of that parking, we want to see decoupling of, rent for parking versus rent for living. And that makes it such that, there's, competition for those spaces, and then partnered with, car share associated with those projects as an equity element for folks that can't afford to both own a car and pay for space and all that. So it's kind of a program that we'd be implementing. And so I think this does support that program and emphasizes that in terms of what can happen with that revenue. I am uncertain whether we can create that sort of linkage. It's possible. I just don't know. So I'd have to research that. And I guess what I would say is if the committee wants to recommend this policy going forward, we could bring it forward, and then it would, we'd ultimately create a policy that did the most that it can do given the constraints that we have. But we'll try and get creative. I mean, maybe the existing structure can't create that sort of fund, but maybe we just need to increase the cost of the parking tickets and then, make it such that that increased increment goes into trail fund.
It seems like that would be something that would be appropriate to be outside of this particular document, right? It's kind of like the electrification policy. That would just be the general parking policy kind of thing that would be incorporated into the whole city and not just the gateway area. So yeah, so we don't need to add
could be.
Just.
But the policy could be different in the gateway area than it could be in the city as a whole if we're trying to incentivize particular behavior of using cars less and alternatives more as an energy saving measure and environmental benefit.
So just as a recap, do we have warm fuzzies on this with the understanding that we'll create a policy that pushes us forward as far as we can see, or is there more discussion about this that we need to dig into detail?
It's fine to me.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay.
Right. Our next one is 7G. Michael, you had a comment on here.
Yeah, what I was saying is that I like the grid streets of Arcata a lot, and intentionally live in an area of town that has grid streets. So, and I've seen some things that are claimed to be advanced that do not have through streets, and I think that are inferior to grid streets, even if the grid streets are made narrower than they have traditionally been made.
So one thing the committee should consider is that there are a lot of areas where our grid is incomplete because there's no public right-of-way there. And so we do have a couple of areas where, AmeriGas is a perfect example. It's an entire city block, one property. So there's ample opportunity to provide some, bike ped facilities through that block, through that development. I don't think we would necessarily want to see, a new street created through there. That would be a mid-block street anyway, but just using it for an example. But it is possible to, design it so that it has an alleyway. Another area is the southern area where we have the Barrel District, where we don't have, In Street, for example, doesn't go all the way through. We don't have the public land. That portion is in the coastal zone. That street would probably go through, a wetland. And so there's lots of reasons, lots of rationale for not completing the grid there. But there are non-motorized access points, trails that we could have through there and or, walking streets, if you will. So that's kind of where we left it on the policy level. We want to try and complete streets where we can, recognizing that they may not be complete for all modes.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on that one? Shall we move on?
So just noted or any recommended changes?
I think just noted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got incentivize active transportation. We support those. Michael supports those. I think all of us do. And then my comment, like this is again one of these things of like with bike parking, it just, there's a difference between just putting a bike rack out in front of a building and actually putting something that's covered and secure. And then, also thinking about e-bikes. There's so many e-bikes I see everywhere. So having parking for that, and again, secure parking, so that way people feel safe, taking their bikes and having a place to charge and a covered place to lock them. So again,
I think that fully emphasizes and supports the policy, the existing policy, and it's a good clarification. So if the committee is okay with it, I would say that those you're going to see included.
Yeah, I think that looks good.
It looks good.
I agree.
Okay.
I think that's it. Did we get through them all?
I think so.
No, actually, the last, if you scroll all the way down, this was a comment that I made,
Okay.
and I added it here because there wasn't the chapter 2 community benefit. I think this is probably where it belongs, but there was no section above for that. There was no section in the table for that section in the plan. And so this was trying to address, I think it's in our notes at the top. But anyway, certainly the last meeting we had, some of the folks that spoke today, some of the public commenters spoke at that last meeting about their concern about solar shading. And so I've actually talked with Jim Becker since then. And I think the committee, as my recollection anyway, was receptive to, sort of the issue of solar shading. And it's something that we've addressed as a committee. That was probably a number of years ago, but I remember we did some work on sort of, solar access laws and that sort of thing. And so I was just thinking about that and thinking, and I guess when I think about it, if we're building new structures, and if we're building, a development with multiple new structures, and there's some shading of, one new structure on another new structure, that's something that when the design is being done, I think that would be accounted for as part of the design process, and the efficiency of those buildings, and anybody who's going to live in those buildings is going to know, that's just how it's designed. But if we're putting up new buildings, next to existing buildings, and especially if we're putting up larger multi-story buildings in close proximity to, let's say residences, then, for people that have lived there and maybe have solar on their roof, maybe they don't, maybe they would like to have solar on their roof, which is something that, we've been encouraging, to then put a very tall building across the street that is on their south side and blocks the sun from their space and makes it impossible for them to put up solar. That concerns me, and I guess I was reaching for sort of, I went back and looked at, there's a Solar Shade Control Act which does not address new development or new structures. It only addresses vegetation, but it does give some guidelines for what's acceptable in terms of vegetation. It also requires that somebody actually have the solar energy system put in, not that they might want to put one in at some point. So that's kind of a distinction as well. But and it uses this language of that you wouldn't, once somebody puts in a solar electric or solar thermal system, that somebody else can't come in and plant trees, let's say across the street, that grow up and end up shading that solar energy system more than 10% between the hours of 10 and 2, because that's when you get your greatest solar resource. So my thought was that, there could be some sort of guideline within the plan that at the very least encourages, kind of like we've been doing with other things, that, it could just be a mandatory flat requirement. Maybe that's too blunt of a policy. Maybe not. I'm not sure, but at the very least, it could bring the issue to the fore and stress the importance of addressing solar shading on existing structures. And there's also a solar easement code in the civil code. I don't know that would be appropriate, but that's where somebody actually where a new property ends up, I think, establishing an easement for an adjacent property that somebody can't, I guess, modify. I guess it's for modifying a property. I'm not quite sure how that works. Or maybe it would be on a piece of property now that if it's then developed later, it would create an easement that someone who came in to develop it later couldn't basically develop into that easement. And the easement is basically the solar access to the adjacent facility. In any event, I think, and David, I don't know, you might be able to comment on. I know there was a couple of questions that came up earlier about the modeling, the solar shade modeling. I did just some very quick sort of back of the envelope. I used to teach solar class, so I understand the path of the sun across the sky and the angles and so forth. And so I just did a quick back of the envelope look at, okay, if I'm in a home on the north side of the street and my house is, my roof is 15 feet up and I want solar access on my roof, and there's a building, across a 24-foot street, sort of standard 2-lane street. And I kind of looked at, I think I was assuming maybe 15-foot setbacks. It looked to me like the building across the street could be, I want to say 40 feet tall or so before it would start to, at least at solar noon on the shortest day of the year. I didn't look at a bunch of other hours. I didn't look between 10 and 2. I just looked at solar noon, which is when the sun is highest. But I looked at it on the shortest day of the year. So it's when it's the lowest in the sky. And it appeared to me that you could probably have about a 40-foot building across the street and not shade the roof of a structure that has a 15-foot roof on the other side. Now, if you started building above that, you'd start shading the roof, but all you'd have to do is have, that sort of stair-step setback for the building across the street. So I think, I think if you do have somebody looking at this with some modeling, the thing about the modeling is, we're not talking about any specific projects here, right? We're talking about a gateway plan. So we don't really have a specific structure and a specific adjacent structure. But that said, you could look at, a couple of different case studies of situations that you might have, and someone could do some of that modeling and could look at, a 3-story or a 4-story structure, and then even higher structures and see where, at this point, it really does start to create some serious shading. But if we have a setback that says, okay, it could be 3 stories or 4 stories, and then the next story has to have a setback of additional, say, 25 feet or something, and then it could go up another story, you could see something where you have a stair-step thing, or you might have a 6 or 7-story building that actually doesn't create a shade problem on a structure on the adjacent street, with the right design. And to me, I think that's something that would be very informative, and I think it might help some of the people that are concerned about this see that, there's actually a way that you can have multi-stories as long as there's some guidelines here to protect, that solar shade aspect. So anyway, those were my thoughts.
I feel like there's something in the plan that is, maybe it's not required, but I'm looking at image 2 in the gateway plan, and it shows just that, like the setbacks as you get higher.
And I might, and maybe it is there, and if it is, and I missed that, I apologize. So maybe.
I think that is definitely the purpose of the setbacks. It's not really articulated anywhere in policy. I think the language that you provided, there may need to be a little work done on this language. the Solar Shading Act, or excuse me, the Solar Control Act is, I've done a little bit of research into it. And to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure, how you calculate that 10%, for example. Is it 10% on any given day? Is it 10% over the year? What is the 10%? Because I think if it's 10% over the year, you're going to find that, you could probably build a 6-story building right up on the street frontage and make the 10% of the year. But having said that, I think everything you said is definitely the intent behind the plan. I think we can find some language that sort of emphasizes that. And the intent is that with the form-based code, we'd be able to establish those standards in more detail. And it may be that some areas have, more, bigger street side setback than others. If you're on the south side of the block, because we do have a lot of regularity, even though we're not looking at a specific project, we have a lot of regularity throughout the district. They're all 50-foot wide street rights of way. Typically, the setback and the frontage is pretty similar to the buildings on the north. Buildings on the north are going to have more of a shading problem than buildings on the south. Except as you stated earlier, with respect to new buildings that are being built, in conjunction with those buildings to the south. Mm-hmm. And so I think that through the form-based code, we really can create a set of standards that's very sensitive to that. And we do have a couple of buildings that in the 3D GIS model that is still in the administrative draft form right now that we can demonstrate that with. And so I'm real hopeful that, in the next month or so, we'll be able to bring that out, share it with the community, share it with the Energy Committee, and you'll be able to take a look at what, what's being proposed and how those, affect existing development as well as proposed new development. So yeah, I think if the committee is behind that, I think staff's intention was to bring forward some language that emphasized the solar shading aspect of it and create a policy around that. So we can certainly do that and would appreciate the support of the committee.
Great. Thank you,
one
David.
thing that I just wanted to throw out there is I think the idea, of putting something in the policy about solar shading is a good idea, especially there's been a lot of discussion about it. One of the concerns I have, though, is in terms of trade-offs. So, and David, you kind of touched on this, whether this regulation would go through the Solar Control Act or not, who knows? But that obviously is a clear precedent. And, when as you mentioned, the thresholds of that act are not very clear, like 10% of what. But here's the point that I want to make is being conscious of the trade-offs, especially with the idea that, I don't even know if this would come into play, but a concern of mine is that, by adding another story to a building, you get a potential benefit of added housing units, assuming it was housing. This is a hypothetical example. Get the benefit of added housing units with that extra story, housing units that we need. But, it crosses, just for sake of example, I'm going to use these numbers. It crosses that 10% threshold by 1 or 2%. So there's the trade-off. Is it better to have housing units or is it better to shade that one roof by an extra 1 or 2%? And I don't have the right answer to that, but I'd like to see that discussion take place in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not here now, but that's kind of the idea that concerns me with the building heights is trade-offs there, and not adequately kind of digging into it.
One other aspect of this is that we're looking into from a consulting company is a solar that's being installed on the sides of buildings, so that even if a tall building is blocking a building on the side or behind it, that energy that's hitting the building could actually be absorbed and be used to produce electricity. And that could be a possible amenity to offset the shading that building is creating.
Yeah, but and I just a counterpoint, not to disagree with that, Michael, but also there's the there's the solar energy aspect of it, and then there's just like the solar aspect of, sun hitting your house and not being totally shaded out by a building. And, to me, that's almost a bigger concern than the solar panels, just given that California's got lots of solar on the grid right now. I mean, I know we get our energy from Humboldt Bay, but, assuming that the energy coming to your house is renewable, regardless of whether you have solar in your house or not, the bigger concern, I would think, as a resident, I'm not affected, I'm not near the Gateway community, but like I would be more concerned about, a big building coming in just like shading my house. So those are kind of, concerns that I think that I hear expressed by public comment in addition to the solar. So
no, that's certainly valid, Andre.
Not to say that we shouldn't build high. I definitely do support tall buildings, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier. That table that was like made it really clear that 8 stories is only in a specific part of the area, and not you couldn't just put grids of 8-story buildings all throughout the Gateway plan. It's only in one specific area if you do a whole extra lot of stuff. So I don't know that point gets emphasized enough that I see in other meetings, but that's kind of what I've taken from what I've read so far.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the solar gain is also a really important element to this. So thank you for bringing that up. The designs can be such that I'm not going to say that no building will ever be shaded by another building. I think that's not a realistic expectation, but I do think that we can limit the shading that does provide meaningful solar gain to buildings, existing buildings in particular, because they're not designed necessarily to reflect on other buildings that aren't there yet. What I've seen in practice is even in the larger buildings, the Plaza Point, for example, or the Sorrel Place that was recently built. The mitigations included in the design for those buildings really does ameliorate the impact of solar shading on adjacent buildings. And again, it's not to say that they aren't at some points shaded. And then from what I've seen in the shading analysis and the 3D GIS, you can set thresholds for for how many hours a given area is in shadow, given the design that's been modeled. And having a typical 2-hour threshold results in fairly limited areas of buildings being shaded in the winter. And then we also have to take into consideration, both in terms of solar heat gain, but also in terms of solar generation during the winter. Our winters are pretty overcast and the sun is pretty low in the sky, and so that's not the peak time for generating either one of those energy sources. I know during the winter every little bit helps, but most folks are going to have to turn the heater on to keep it comfortable. So for the remainder of the year, though, there really is free and open access during the spring through fall. There is free and open access to most of these designs we're finding. So again, Mike, to your point, setting a strict threshold, we might need to take another look at that, and maybe have more of a aspirational threshold, and then that is something that could be considered. If there's significant solar shading as a proposed building, even though we've designed the form-based code to prevent that, that during that design review section we can potentially make modifications to that point. So we'll take that into consideration. I'll try and work on some language. We don't have proposed language yet, but this is definitely something we've heard, time and time again from, committees and from the public. So we plan to address it.
Sounds good.
So do we feel comfortable taking some action now, or do we want to do that at a later time? And have, with our full committee or full non-recused committee?
Well, I think, I guess it sounded to me like the time frame on this that David was hoping we would kind of get through and make a decision. I think before our next, since we're meeting every other month now, it kind of like you were looking for feedback within a month or so, David. Did I get that right?
Yeah, the committee should really do what it feels is best. What I've been telling committees is that the Council and Planning Commission have not yet had their study session. At some point, the council is really going to set the tone for what the timeline is that we're, trying to march toward. The committee should definitely not feel rushed. I feel like there's been a good discussion. I feel like all of these policies are generally, there's not been any countervailing opinions. If you took action tonight, I have a set of recommendations I can carry forward. If the committee wanted to, set a subcommittee, as some, community members had suggested, or you wish to take this up at a special meeting, or any of those options moving forward are still an option. The plan has been out since December. I think when we first met, I said, take a look at it. We'll come back anytime to get a recommendation. Here we are, a couple months later, trying to, formulate that. Certainly there's this time frame when we're going to establish this is the set of policies that we're doing the initial environmental work on, and that's kind of the next critical path for the project, is to get to environmental review. And that's not to say that if the committee down the road said, hey, look, we really think we need to add this additional policy now that we've had, more time to think about it and we're really focused on it now, that it couldn't likely be incorporated without, amending the environmental document, the EIR that we'll be doing for this. So I would rather have, a recommendation, sooner, and then the committee could take as much time and take this up at other, meetings as you see fit. And if you have more recommendations that come later, go ahead and bring them on.
Well, I'll say that I feel pretty comfortable recommending what we've done tonight. That is the language. My understanding is that the goal tonight was to kind of populate that far to the right column with I'm looking at the column header now, committee recommended modification. I feel pretty comfortable that we went through a good process doing that, and I would certainly feel comfortable recommending that language that we've come up with tonight.
Any other opinions?
I would agree with Mike, and I think given what David said, I mean, I'm not sure when. I'm just thinking about the committee members. So I guess it's mainly Gwellen and Carice because George needed to recuse himself. So if they get a chance to see kind of what we came up with, I mean, we had a discussion with them prior, so they made some comments. To me, I don't think there was anything. We revisited a couple of things. There wasn't anything I think was controversial really or anything. But if they had some additional input, it sounds like we would. There's still a chance for us to add some more input. And we might end up with coming up with some other ideas or something between now and the next time we meet, or if we decide we want to. But I'm not sure. The idea of establishing the subcommittee. I mean, that if there was a group of people who wanted to take on, some additional research and recommendations or whatever. But anyway, I agree with Mike that I would be happy to vote on what we've accomplished tonight, at least as one milestone, and then wherever we go from there can kind of play itself out.
Mike, if you wanted to make a motion to that effect, that is something that I would support.
Okay, I will move to approve all the language that we put together tonight.
I second that.
All right, we got a motion and a second. So I guess Morgan, can you take roll or vote?
Yes. Yes, I will. Get to the right page so I say your names right. Andrea Allstone.
Yes.
Mike Kowalski.
Yes.
Michael Winkler.
Yes.
James Zolik.
Yes.
Okay. All right. We've got motion passes. And is that clear enough as far as the motion goes that you understand what our intent?
Yep, absolutely. I took notes. You viewed them. You moved on that action and approved it. So I appreciate that. And I'll take a look at the solar easements, and if I find information, I'll pass that back through the liaison if there's ways that we can incorporate those. I suspect those happen when you do a subdivision, but I'll look into it. Thanks all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
David, can I just ask you one question?
Sure.
About whether the committee wants to have a special meeting in August, or whether that would be something of interest, because that was something that Emily Benvey had to leave the meeting tonight, but she wanted me to make sure to bring that up. That was an option, was to community development could combine energy related aspects of various general plan sections, or include public facilities, infrastructure, transportation design for review. I'm not sure if that's something, David, you are needing for your process, or.
No, I don't think so. And I think in terms of a special meeting, you might have a hard time picking a date right now that, that everyone could attend. So if I think the committee, if they want to have a special meeting, they absolutely should. You might try and send out a poll after the fact and see if there's interest. But, I think that, based on what you've accomplished today and sort of your next steps moving forward, a special meeting isn't necessary. You could just pick it up at your next meeting if you wish to.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you.
David.
Hi.
All right.
Okay. I'm going to send a text to George just in case he was able to rejoin at this point.
That's fine.
And let him know.
Can let him know. But I'm happy to. It's pretty late.
Yeah, exactly. So if he doesn't reply or join us, soon here, I think Andre, you could just keep moving through our agenda.
You're a natural, Andrea.
Thanks. So next up is.
I'm sorry. I thought maybe I'm just curious what the three of you think about a special meeting. I don't know that one is necessary, but I don't know if anybody feels strongly one direction or the other. I don't have any.
The one thing I will just say as a point of procedure, it looks like that is later on in the agenda. I don't know if that matters.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up too.
Okay. Oh, it's on the agenda. Okay, sorry. Oops. Thanks for
keep you on task. So
sorry. I wanted to make sure to ask David since he was departing the meeting.
Got it.
So our next agenda item 7 is committee communications. Then, do anybody have communications they'd like to share?
The only thing that I would say is that if at some point a special meeting I think could be valuable, but I think that what we've accomplished today, I don't think this would be a good time in the next couple months to have a special meeting.
I appreciate that, Michael. I think I would agree. I think if there's, I think having a special meeting just to meet, if we don't really have some good direction as to what we're trying to accomplish, is probably not a good use of our time or anybody's time. But this is a really big deal for the city, and it has real significant impacts for many years into the future. So I think if we do find there's some decision points or points for where we could have additional input and comment. For instance, if they come back with things and we can anyway, I would support some dedicated meeting at an appropriate time. But
does anybody have any communications not related to the special meeting?
Sorry.
I'll just report out that Jim and I and actually the mayor went and saw presentations from Redwood Coast Montessori. Redwood Coast, I think it's Redwood Coast. There's
at the old 10-pin building.
Yeah, the old 10-pin building, but there's a couple Montessori schools, and I sometimes get them.
I think it's Redwood Coast. It's like a high school, right?
Yeah, it's a high school. I get it confused sometimes with Mad River Montessori, which is a preschool. So different schools. But the 8th graders presented to us their ideas for the Gateway Area Plan, many of which I think are sort of already being thought about in the plan. But it was fun to see how they are excited and how they're thinking about things. So that was a fun committee assignment.
Fun.
It was fun. I left feeling, I left feeling hopeful about our future because there was a bunch of engaged, lively young people sharing their ideas, and I think my biggest message was, we need you. You can make. There's a lot of problems in our world. We need you. You can make a difference. Please do.
All right. Any other committee communications? All right. Moving on to agenda item 8, RCEA update. And I don't see any RCEA folks in our attendees. So
I do see George, though.
Oh, there's George. Feel free to promote him, and we can
Get it?
turn it back over.
I did think of one. I might have. I didn't think of it in time, but I did think of one quick committee communication update I could give, but I don't have to. If that's been closed, I don't have to. What's that?
I'm fine with letting you give your update. Hopefully, we won't violate any procedural things.
Look, George, you left, and we're not following procedure. It's just actually, Andrea's been a natural. I have to say that. But my quick update is just a quick update about the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid project. We had a grand opening on June the 21st or 22nd. I'm forgetting exactly which day it was now, but anyway, it was right around the solstice. That was an amazing weather week here on the North Coast. We had just beautiful, sunny, clear weather we get up in the morning and all day long. So it was really quite nice. We had a lot of people come from out of the area. We had energy commissioners. We had public utilities commissioners. We had Peter Clower from CAISO, a large group contingency from PG&E that were involved in the project. Almost probably close to a dozen PG&E folks. It was a great celebration. We had a bunch of events around it. I had a party at Mendenhall Studios at our Kinetic Clubhouse the night after the celebration. So everything went really well. We actually islanded the microgrid and were islanded for the whole day. So while we were doing the celebration, we were running on battery and solar power. So the facility now, we've been participating in the wholesale market. So for normal grid connected operations since just before Christmas. And we now have full permission to operate and have been able to operate in island mode. So we only do that if there's a grid outage. So it actually has happened. There's been at least 1 or 2 unplanned outages already, very brief, but so we're now fully operational as a microgrid. If the grid goes down or there's I think at one point there was just kind of a brownout, then the switch opens and isolates the microgrid. Our RCEA's battery and PV forms the microgrid and provides power. And then when the grid comes back, it automatically reconnects, and it's actually capable, and it's done this already unannounced, just to seamlessly transition from grid connected to island, and then from island mode back to grid connected, which is really it's a pretty not every microgrid can do that. It's a lot more complicated to do that and more difficult. But so anyway, it's working really well, and it's basically now established the front of the meter community microgrid model. PG&E service territory has established a tariff that now allows other communities to do that, established a program, the Community Microgrid Enablement Program, and incentives and a whole program to lead communities through the process. And then there's a statewide microgrid incentive program, because the other programs I was talking about were just in PG&E territory. There's a statewide program that has been created and largely informed by the airport project as well. So super big success, and it was just exciting to get to that milestone.
Awesome. Thanks for the update. I just mentioned that I talk to PG&E regularly in my day job, and several of them have mentioned how cool it is that we have a microgrid up with having nothing to do on the call that on microgrid. So it's fun to know that it's getting around. All right. Well, George is back. Would you like to take over the helm of the meeting?
No way. I have heard that you're handling things, so please continue.
All right. So that was our committee communications. We don't have an RCEA update. So that brings us to item 9, staff updates. Morgan, do you have any updates for us?
Yeah, I have really just short updates. On the climate action plan, the county is in process of putting together an RFP for the CEQA analysis and developing the public outreach and engagement strategy. And then the city of Arcata is continuing to work with RCEA on decarbonizing the Arcata Community Center, the city's parks building over near the community center, and the sports complex. So I don't have details on that. I'm still coming up to speed on a lot of those things, being new here, but those are the updates that Emily brainstormed before she had to go.
Awesome. Thanks for that. All right. So that brings us to the long sought future meetings agenda item 10. So do we want to have a special meeting in August? Sounds like we do not. But George missed a lot of that conversation. So, recap briefly is that there was some potential for a special meeting in August to, I guess, further refine our recommendations for the area plan policy, policies within it. And I think we got through a good chunk of them. We felt good about it. We passed that on, made a motion to make those recommendations to the plan. And so we all felt good about not having a meeting in August. Does that sound right?
Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll have a regular meeting, but not a special meeting.
Yeah, and so that brings us to item B, the September 19th regular meeting. And so when I was reading the meeting minutes for this meeting, I had made the motion to meet in meeting today for this meeting, but we did not do that. So I guess I have a question of is it planned to be in person September 19th?
I would say wait and see. Okay. I know you as a committee approved meeting in person, but the city was still choosing and suggesting virtual. I think we're just waiting and seeing what happens over the next month or so. If that is okay with you, to stay tuned, and we will send you an email update.
That sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me. I'm totally flexible.
Great.
Yeah, my recollection was we were kind of leaning toward virtual and felt like the city was going the other direction, so we sort of tried to get on board. But these days, you just never know.
Yeah, I think being flexible sounds good.
Yeah, it's letting the council take the lead.
Great.
So we don't need a motion for that, right? That's just our next meeting.
I think so.
Great. Well, I guess with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
All right.
Good job, Andrea.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in September.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good job, folks. See you next time, George. Oh, actually, I'm going to. Yep.
Bye.
Bye.